It is my privilege and joy that we can continue our Bible study in the book of Ephesians, and we have today the subtitle, Practicing Supreme Loyalty to Christ. We have seen that in this last part of his letter, Paul becomes practical in relation with our relationships, and he takes those most important relationships and addresses them. And he says here, submitting yourself to one another in the fear of God. And we have seen in our last presentations how that has to work. And now we want to repeat to make it more sure that we understood it correctly. Wives, submit yourself unto your own husbands as unto the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, and he is the Savior of the body. Therefore, as the church is subject unto Christ, so let the wives be to their own husbands in everything. Husbands, love your wives, even as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for it, that he might sanctify and cleanse it with the washing of water by the word, that he might present it to himself a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that it should be holy and without blemish. So ought men to love their wives as their own bodies. He that loveth his wife loveth himself. For no man ever yet hated his own flesh, but nourisheth and cherisheth it, even as the Lord the church. For we are members of his body, of his flesh, and of his bone. For this cause shall a man leave his father and mother, and shall be joined unto his wife, and they two shall be one flesh. This is a great mystery, but I speak concerning Christ and the church. Nevertheless, let every one of you in particular so love his wife, even as himself, and the wife see that she reverence her husband. Now we know this, and we spoke last time about this, and now we go to the next section where it addresses the children. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment, with promise, that it may be well with thee, and thou mayest live long on the earth. And ye fathers, provoke not your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. Now, of course, out of these 4 Bible verses, we could make a whole week, at least a seminar, understanding how we have to raise the children and what it means to obey the parents and what it means to honor the parents. Because what I have seen in these 20 years of practicing in my practice, I could be convinced that disease comes because people cannot respect their parents, honor their parents. They judge them. And here the Bible is right. It is the first commandment with a promise. He who can honor and love his parents may live long on earth. And he who cannot will be sick. Because sickness comes from this deception of the heart that the child thinks the parents owe him something, while the parents never owe a child anything. So it is something that we have to take serious, and I'm sorry that we cannot go more deeper into these things because of the time issue, but I hope it gives us food for thought so that we go and study deeper these things for ourselves. Now he addresses the servants. He says, servants, be obedient to them, that are your masters, according to the flesh. So the masters according to the flesh, because they're in this relationship of being servants or employees. With fear and trembling, in singleness of your heart, as unto Christ, not with eye service, as man pleases, but as the servants of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart, with good will, doing service, as to the Lord and not to man, knowing that whatsoever good thing any man doth, the same shall he receive of the Lord, whether he is bond or free. And ye masters, do the same things unto them, forbearing, threatening, knowing that your master also is in heaven, neither is there respect of persons with him. So here we see, as a conclusion, the relationships he addresses. This is Christ and the church. And he says Christ is love. He loves the church, and the church submits to to him. He takes the marriage relationship. He says to the husband to love the wife. He says to the wife to submit to this love. Then the parents. These are my parents and me when I was a child. He says to them, love, not provoke to anger your children. And the children says, be obedient to them, to the masters and to the slaves or servants or workers. He says, doing good things, no threats. And to them that serve, he says, be obedient. And all this, he says, to be done in the Lord. So this is the key that Paul wants to say, because relationships have an order of function. And he wants to make clear the order of function. But everything must function in the Lord, and in the Lord, everything functions with love. It's not possible to be in the Lord and not function with love, because we were made to be channels. That is, our spirit has to take the love from God and give it on to the people, to those around us. First to the wife, and then to the husband, and then to the children, and so on. So the law is very plain. I have to do everything out of love, out of the word of God, because love is an information that God has put in his word. Now I take that and I put it into action. For whose benefit? It is the own health is dependent on how I love my neighbor. So Paul makes it very clear. Loving your neighbor is loving yourself. Now this is an amazing thing. And I really like it, how God made it. So you're healthy and you're well off if you love your neighbor. Because that what you think about your neighbor goes exactly into your brain as power to live or power to die. So it's not like this, oh, you must love yourself in order to love your neighbor, like people interpret the Bible. No, it doesn't function like this. I must be independent to the one that I love, on the humans. I love to take from God, that's dependency. But I love to give love. And the more I think beautiful and good about the others, it benefits myself because it gives power to the body. Because out of my spirit into my body must come a power that is love. And that makes the electrical thing, and the body can function and everything is nourished correctly. So Paul understood the law, and I like this because God has also showed it to me in my practice. Loving your neighbor is loving yourself. And the more you care for him, that's how you care for yourself. You can never be selfish loving your neighbor, but understanding that when you love him, it's well with you. When you respect your parents, it's love with you, it's well with you. It's not about them. If your parents have done you wrong and you cannot love them, it's you who suffer. If your enemy you cannot love him, it's you who suffer, it's not the enemy. Because this is the law. This is how God made that the Spirit should always exercise love towards the others, no matter what they do. That's why Paul doesn't come and say, we have to change, the masters needs to become slaves and the slave needs to become masters. The Bible does not want to make an outside change of things. Because Jesus came to change the heart. Salvation must happen in the heart, not outside of that. But our body, who lives from what we think, shows us if we are in the truth or if we are in deception. So, what does it mean to be the head? I want to go again through that. We have read in 1 Corinthians 11:3, God is the head of Christ, Christ is the head of the man, and man is the head of the wife. And he could continue, and the wife is the head of the child, and the child is the head of the animal, or whatever it is. We have seen that to be head is to be provider, to supply the needs. God doesn't rule his universe by force or by a rulership like we know it of on earth. By providing all the needs, that's how everything lives and exists through God. What head does not mean is to dominate, to determine, conditioning, demanding obedience from your subjects is not to be the head. He who demands that someone else should be subject to him by obedience, by conditioning them, he has not understood anything about the love and the order of function that God made. He who is higher is the one who provides more than the one that is lower to him. And it's just the order of function. That's why God tells that when he made a relationship, he made it with a purpose. And so in this relationship, there are more individuals implied. And why it is more implied, it is necessary to be an order of the supply, an allocation of tasks. So I cannot say, well, if I am the stomach, I want to become a liver. It's not possible. If I was made to be a stomach, that is, I have this location, I do my job of supplying, then that's my job. If I am in the church deacon or elder or so, I was not made to rule over the others, but I was made to serve them. But it's the opposite. The world, yes, in a so-called democracy, you put people there that should represent you. But in the end, they represent themselves and they rule over you. And terribly enough, you have elected them. But you elected them to rule over you. That's how Israel wanted to have a king. And God says, that's not the way I want you to understand things. Because you don't need a king in an earthly way. But they wanted a king. They wanted someone to rule them. Isn't that amazing how unwise we are? No. God makes an order of function. And in this order of function, we submit everyone to the place he is. We identify with one's task. If we are a woman, we don't want to become a man. And if we are a stomach, we don't want to become a heart. We are just the place. If you are a deacon, you don't need to be an elder or whatever there is. I need to know I like the place God has given me to work. And I'm understanding my dependence on the supplier because I want to supply my church. I want to supply those who are after me with that love that I take from God. And to submit means to not interfere in the task of the other person. I hope that we understand that no one needs to interfere in the task of the other person. We only would do that if, in the deception of our hearts, we want to rule over others. But this must be excluded. We cannot and are not called for any position that we were put there. We only have the position to do our job and not interfere, not try to dominate or rule over the one that is under us. God's followers are submitted and obedient to him out of conviction. Everyone is submitted to God because we are all dependent on him. So to agree with the absolute dependence on him is most important. Do I agree it's good to be dependent on him, to go to the riches of his treasure and take from there? I like it that I don't have anything in me that I can go and take as much as I want to supply then those who come after me. To identify with his will, his law. That is, I like to be altruist. I like to be unselfish, to not do anything for myself. I'm not yet there, but I'm identifying myself with his law and I say, well, this law is fantastic. When I love my neighbor, that benefits me. That's nice. Oh, I like this. I like this, that everything exists because it gives love from where to the one that follows. So I identify with his law of unselfishness. And then I want that my will and his will should be the same, so there should be no discrepancy, there should be no contradiction. And so this is why I ask God, give me arguments, help me to understand how shall I do these things and how, so that I can put my will exactly where His will is. But I do this because I like it, because He convinces me, because I want to be in complete consistency with what I do. I don't want to do things out of unknowledge or out of just for a favor. I want to have complete consistency with what I do. I want to be convinced that what I do is right. So there is no blind obedience, but unity with Him. Christ explains that in John 17 with His unity with His Father. And He asked the Father and us to become this unity, that we are like Him because we want and are His children, not because we do just things obeying blindly. So let's come to the subject of to obey and honor the parents, and to the parents, do not provoke children to anger. Children are spiritually and physically dependent on their parents through their procreation. There is no child that has a choice to not be dependent on the mother's body and on the mother's spirit. Now, after the child is born and grows, the physical dependency becomes less, but the spiritual dependency is strengthened by the innate error in the heart of the child. So that's an amazing thing. The spiritual dependency should also become lower, more to God, like the physical becomes more to the nature. But this doesn't happen because neither the parents nor the child know of this dependency. Even the parent does not know that it's dependent on the child. So the conflict between the child and the parents during puberty proves the interdependence. That means it is, you could say, more physiological or normal that a child should be spiritually dependent on his parents, but that the parents should be dependent spiritually on the child, that is absolute not normal. But unfortunately, the parents bind themselves to the children because they have the same error, and so they must fight, each one, of course, for the good. I just spoke recently with a mother that has 3 children, which are under 10 years old, and she says the children are fighting every day. I said, yes. And she says, I'm going in between them. I want to stop them. And sometimes I beat them up because they are not doing it right. Now she loses her control. While the children are losing their control, the mother loses her control also. And that can never get well. So where does the change start? The change must start with the mother. The mother needs to become in control of herself. And she needs to work together with God in a plan, a strategy, how to help the child to not fight again. Because the only one that can stop the fight is the child, not the mother. But in the deception and her dependency on the child, she goes in between, she thinks she can stop that. That's an error, she can never stop it. The only one that can stop it is the child. But for this, the child needs to take responsibility for what he does and not. But before the child can take that and become in control of itself, the mother must become in control of herself. Because if she goes in between, if she loses her control, then she provokes the children to anger. Go in between 2 children that are fighting and see if they become quiet. Oh, you become very strong, you shout. So because you're now physically stronger, they might see that they have no chance, so they might retract. But you have solved nothing by this. Because the heart remains the same, and tomorrow it happens the same again. So it must be changed. But it starts with, do not provoke children to anger. The mother must have full control over her heart, over her thoughts. Because the child are taking that atmosphere that the mother gives on. And if she is not in peace, then the children cannot be in peace. If she is not in peace with her husband, the children will not be in peace with each other. So, yes, the children needs to honor and obey their parents, But this, the parents must educate them to understand. But it must be an education of the heart, not of the behavior. But we educate behavior because we don't understand that the child needs to change, because it wants to change, because it wants to stop fighting. But for this, the mother needs and the father needs to be in control. That's why it's so important to understand this relationships. So the conflicts arises from different spiritual interests, which each of them wants for himself, out of selfishness. So let's make it clear. We saw in our last presentations that no one mourns the dead ones, but he mourns himself. And the parents and the children do not get into the fight because they want something wrong. No, they want something good, but they want it for themselves. This is why the mother goes in between the children, not because she loves the children, but because she's selfish. But that she doesn't understand because it's an unconscious phenomenon. But in the moment you become violent, you cannot be in love. Love does not become violent. Love never loses temper. It cannot. The one who is in the truth, he can never lose his control over his thoughts or actions, because it all starts in the thought. That's why we need to understand our heart. We need to understand the way we think, so that we do not say, well, I want the good. Yes, everyone wants the good. But he doesn't see that his heart wants the good for himself. He wants the other should live for himself. He wants the children should obey for himself. He wants peace for himself. Everything is just about himself. And this is what needs to be changed. So, if one wanted to fulfill different interests for God's sake, conflict would be impossible. So, if we do it all in the Lord, like Paul says, everyone has his place doing it in the Lord, that is, in love. We do it for God's sake. Then we don't do it out of selfish motivation, and then conflict will not be present. A conflict can only be there where is selfishness, where is deception. In the truth, conflict does not exist. Obedience is possible only from unity in the will of God. So if the parent is in the will of God, then the parents can help the child to be in the will of God. And if they are all in the will of God, there will be unity, there will be obedience, there will be peace. And this is what Paul wants us to understand, and this is God's design for our families. Now he speaks to the servants. They shall obey their masters as the Lord with fear and trembling. And we will see a few Bible verses that speak about fear and trembling. So what does he mean by obey their masters as the Lord with fear and trembling? Does that mean blind obedience? Can the chief tell everyone everything to his employees to do it, and they have no reason of their own? They're just robots? Does this Paul say? Obey their masters as the Lord? He says it very clear, doing the will of God from the heart. So if your chief or your boss asks something from you that is not the will of God, will you do it? No. With goodwill, doing service. That is, you agree with what you do. So it is about the work. We should obey the masters because we do the job that we have to do. In this, we work for God, not for the master. But it is not about obedience. If the master says, okay, hide this because it must be hide, or lie to this or do this, or put something on your body that is not healthy, would you do it? Because it says here, obey your masters as the Lord with fear and trembling. So that could bring a lot of confusion here. Because Peter also says, the slaves should obey their master. So they don't change the system, they just change the heart. We do good service out of our own will because we agree to it. We do it to God, and we will have the payment from God and not from humans. It's not blind obedience. Let us forever take away blind obedience. It's not existent. If we do things that are contrary to the will of God, we cannot refer to the Bible verses and say, obey your master as the Lord with fear and trembling. Because that's taking all things out of the context. We obey in what we do, but we agree with what we do. And it must be the will of God from the heart, with goodwill, doing service. That means I agree with it. Now, what does it mean, fear and trembling? We won't have the time to go into these Bible verses, but I want to put them here as food for thought. So serve the Lord with fear and rejoice with trembling. Now, how does that work? For David, somehow it has some good meaning, and for Paul as well. He says, and I was with you in weakness and in fear and in much trembling. And about Titus he says, and his inward affection is more abundant toward you, whilst he remembers the obedience of you all, how with fear and trembling you received him. And in Philippians 2:12 he says, wherefore, my beloved, as ye always have obeyed, not as in my presence only, but now much more in my absence, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. What did he want to say? I think it's there very clear. It's seriousness. Is understanding your own weakness, understanding your own nature, but being focused to reach the goal by all means. So think about this and ponder about these Bible verses. I have to come to the end. To masters and employees, God says through Paul, and ye masters, do the same things, like do good things, because that's the context. Do it out of the will of God, forbearing threatening, knowing that your master also is in heaven, neither is there respect of persons with him. So God is no respecter of person. If you're a master or a slave, a wife or a husband, if you're a church member, a leader, or whatever you are, God will not look to you, to your person, because he will just see if love is coming out or is threatening coming out. What is it that comes out of your life? Because that will be judged and that will be put on the balance in the day of judgment. So let us, understanding the depth of the need that we have in our hearts for a Savior and for a change, let us work on this change in our hearts with fear and trembling. Amen.